Elena Ramirez stared at the adoption paperwork through weary eyes. At 38, her hands carried the marks of countless night shifts as a nurse, years spent saving lives while raising 3 kids on her own. Her modest home on the dry edges of San Antonio wasn't much, but until now, it had been enough. "Are you certain about this, Miss Ramirez?" The center director's tone carried faint judgment. "Taking in 5 children is unheard of for someone in your position." Elena didn't glance up. She simply continued signing each form with deliberate steadiness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sharp shadows across her tired face. Outside, the Texas summer heat pressed down on the pavement, life moving on without regard for the choice being made inside those walls. 6 weeks earlier, Sergeant Matthew Collins's flag-covered coffin had been flown home from Iraq. His 5 children stood in silent formation at the service, just as their father had taught them. The oldest was 12, the youngest barely 4. Elena had watched from afar, her own children standing close by. No relatives came forward. The military searched for family, but the time limit was running out. Soon, the siblings would be placed into the system, most likely scattered across separate homes. "These kids require constancy, not charity," the social worker remarked, sliding another sheet across the desk. "The state provides some aid, but it's never sufficient." Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet yet steady. "We don't have to be flawless, just present." What the officials didn't realize was how Matthew had once appeared on Elena's doorstep 3 years earlier, during the harshest snowstorm Texas had seen in decades. Her heater had broken, her youngest was running a fever, and she had been stretched thin from endless double shifts. Without a word, he repaired the furnace, stocked her fridge, and cleared the driveway. When she tried to repay him, he only said, "My wife would have wanted me to help. That's what neighbors do." Now Elena was keeping an unspoken vow, not through grand gestures or publicity. There were no cameras, no social media posts, no emotional interviews, only documents, signatures, and the quiet reshaping of her life to make space for 5 more souls. The center director looked doubtful. "You realize this is permanent. These aren't temporary placements." Elena nodded, stacking the forms neatly before rising. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a night shift, but her posture stayed firm. Through the glass, she could see Matthew's children waiting in the playroom, their belongings crammed into mismatched duffel bags. "I understand. Permanent," she said. "So did their father." As she moved toward the exit, the social worker called after her. "How do you expect to handle this alone?" Elena didn't look back. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Some loads aren't meant to be carried alone," she said softly. "But someone has to take the first step." Elena kept a small wooden box beneath her bed. Inside rested a folded letter she had never mailed to her younger brother Javier, a Marine who never came home from his 3rd deployment over 10 years ago. Beside it lay another letter, this one from Matthew Collins, written just 3 days before his final mission. "If anything happens to me," it read in careful handwriting, "make sure they're not left alone. You're the only one I trust with this, Elena. You know what it means to carry on." The bond between Elena and Matthew ran deeper than simple neighborly kindness. It was tied together by shared loss that only military families truly grasp. Matthew had served in the same unit as Javier. When word came of Javier's death, it was Matthew who appeared at Elena's door still in uniform, offering not hollow words, but quiet understanding. "Your brother saved my life twice," he once admitted, in a rare moment of openness. "I couldn't save him, but I promised I'd look after his family if anything happened." Years later, when Matthew's wife lost her battle with cancer, Elena had returned that care, organizing meals and helping with childcare between her long shifts. Their families had grown close out of necessity and respect, not romance. In the same envelope with Matthew's letter was a military ID card with words handwritten on the back, "To the bravest civilian I know." The adoption process moved forward without attention or ceremony. Elena turned her living room into a bedroom, picked up more shifts, and restructured her entire life around 8 children. Her oldest, now 16, stepped up to help with dinners and schoolwork. Her middle child organized a clothing drive at school, while her youngest welcomed the new siblings with the open-hearted acceptance only children can offer. 4 weeks after the adoption became official, an envelope arrived from the Pentagon. Inside was a request for a private meeting. No explanation given. Elena assumed it involved Matthew's benefits, or perhaps some clerical error. What she didn't know was that Matthew's commanding officer had submitted a detailed account of their shared history to the Presidential Military Family Recognition Program, and her story had reached the Oval Office during a routine briefing. The meeting was held at a nearby military base, away from reporters or crowds. Elena wore her best dress, the same one she had worn at Javier's funeral. Expecting officials and paperwork, she was instead led into a room where the president himself waited. "Miss Ramirez," he said, offering his hand, "I wanted to meet the woman who reflects the values we strive to honor." Elena froze, unsure of protocol. Behind him stood Matthew's commanding officer and several senior officials. On a small table rested a velvet box and a leather folder. "Sergeant Collins wrote to me before his final mission," the president said, his voice steady. "He didn't ask for medals or recognition. He asked that someone look after his children and the nurse who lived next door. He said you were the strongest person he had ever met." The president opened the velvet box, revealing the Civilian Medal of Honor, the nation's highest distinction for a non-military citizen. Beside it, he placed a folder containing trust funds for all 8 children, guaranteeing their futures in higher education through presidential directive. "This country endures because of people like you," the president continued, lowering his tone to make the moment private. "Not because we publicize your story, but because you live it." Elena's hands shook as she accepted the medal and the documents, not out of pride, but from the heavy meaning they carried. The legacies of 2 soldiers, the futures of 8 children, and the quiet grace of service without applause. As the meeting drew to a close, the president added gently, "The press will want this story. It's your decision whether to share it." Elena thought carefully before answering. "With respect, sir, some acts of courage don't need an audience. The children have lost enough without becoming symbols." The president studied her face and nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Then we will protect your privacy, as you have protected their sacrifice. Many do what is right when the world is watching. She had done what was right when no one knew her name." The story should have ended there, a private acknowledgement of a personal sacrifice, but true courage rarely stays hidden. During Matthew's memorial service 1 year after his passing, his commanding officer spoke about the family he left behind. Without mentioning Elena by name, he described how a single mother with 3 children of her own had stepped forward when no one else would, how she had turned her modest home into a refuge for 5 orphaned siblings, and how she survived on 4 hours of sleep between overnight shifts to keep her promise to a fallen comrade. The story rippled quickly through the military community. Veterans groups began calling the base, asking for the identity of the woman. Military spouses organized clothing drives and meal deliveries for the family, but Elena turned down interviews, redirecting donations to a foundation for other children of fallen service members. "This isn't about me," she told the local news crew who showed up at her door. "This is about keeping a promise." Her refusal only deepened public curiosity. In Washington, a senator introduced the Quiet Courage Initiative, providing more resources for families who adopted children of fallen soldiers. The measure passed with unanimous approval, a rare display of unity sparked by Elena's silent determination. The very social worker who had once doubted her capacity now traveled nationwide, sharing the story. "I mistook her quiet for weakness," she admitted, at a national child welfare conference. "I failed to see that true strength doesn't always announce itself." The children's teachers began noticing remarkable changes in their lives. The eldest, once withdrawn and angry, now mentored younger students dealing with a similar grief. The middle siblings thrived in team sports, while the youngest developed an extraordinary ability to comfort classmates in distress. One teacher even published an essay in an academic journal titled "From Chaos to Courage: A Single Mother's Legacy," describing how trauma could be reshaped through steady presence. Yet, Elena stayed committed to her privacy. She accepted medical benefits for the children but refused personal recognition. When a veterans charity offered her a larger home, she declined kindly, explaining that stability wasn't measured in square footage but in consistent love. Her example began sparking action across the state. Within 3 months, A dozen families in Texas had stepped forward to adopt children of fallen service members. A teenage boy, long in foster care, asked his guardians, "Could I stay forever like the Collins kids?" A retired couple turned their empty house into a temporary home for siblings waiting to be adopted, saying they were inspired by Elena's story. The president, honoring his promise of privacy, never named her publicly. Yet in his Veterans Day address, he spoke of ordinary citizens who carried out extraordinary devotion with no expectation of recognition. From the audience, Elena stood with her 8 children, each wearing a small flag pin on their chest. The Department of Defense soon established a specialized support program connecting widows, widowers, and families of service members with essential community resources. They quietly named it Operation Collins, a subtle tribute that most overlooked but carried deep significance for those who knew its origin. 6 months after the adoption, Elena received a hand-delivered letter from the commander who had served with both Matthew and her brother. Inside was a unit patch and a short note. "Your brother once told me that real courage isn't found only on battlefields, but in daily choices to put others first. He would see himself in you." That evening, Elena gathered all 8 children in their crowded living room. Without explanation, she placed 2 folded flags on the mantel, one for Javier, one for Matthew. Between them, she set a framed photo of all 8 children together. "Family isn't always something you're born into," she told them, her voice firm, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "Sometimes it's built from promises kept. Some stories don't need to go viral. They only need to be remembered. If you believe quiet love can change the world, type courage." 5 years passed. The early attention faded, but the impact only deepened. Elena still worked night shifts, though now as a nursing supervisor with a schedule that allowed her to be home when the children returned from school. The oldest Collins child graduated with honors and earned a full scholarship to a military academy, though he chose to study medicine instead of enlisting. "I want to save lives like you do," he told Elena at graduation. Their home remained humble, but it had grown with them. The backyard now held a vegetable garden where each child cared for a small plot. The garage had been turned into a study room, with 8 desks arranged in a circle. The walls displayed trophies, artwork, and school awards, visible proof of lives not just surviving, but thriving. At the dining table, extended by mismatched additions, one chair was always left empty. "It's for those who protect us but can't come back," Elena explained to visitors. It wasn't a shrine to grief, but a living reminder that absence remains part of family identity. On the wall above hung 2 folded flags in matching cases, and between them, a simple wooden plaque inscribed with the words, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph of presence over absence." The community around them had changed as well. Neighbors began gathering regularly for Sunday meals, bringing food, and staying afterward to help with homework. Fellow nurses adjusted schedules so Elena could attend school events. A retired veteran opened his garage to teach the older boys carpentry, while a military widow led a support group for the girls. During the high school graduation of the second Collins child, the principal paused from her prepared remarks. Looking directly at Elena in the audience, she said, "In our community, we've seen something extraordinary. She didn't just adopt children, she adopted duty, and she has carried it better than most of us ever could." Elena's own children, now young adults, spoke of their expanded family not as a weight their mother had taken on, but as the greatest lesson of their lives. Her oldest son, accepted into medical school, wrote in his application essay, "My mother showed me that family isn't defined by circumstance but by choice. Every day, she chose courage over convenience." The youngest Collins child, only 9, had no clear memory of his biological father. Yet when asked to draw his family for a school project, he sketched a circle including all his siblings and Elena, along with 2 figures in uniform standing above them. Not ghosts, but guardians. On quiet nights when homework was done and the little ones were asleep, Elena sometimes sat on the porch steps, staring at faint stars through the city haze. She never spoke of sacrifice or hardship. When asked how she managed everything, she would only smile and say, "Some burdens are heavy because they matter. Not everyone who serves wears a uniform. Some do the right thing quietly, leaving echoes that never disappear." She had just finished signing the adoption papers when the social worker sneered, You think you can raise 5 orphans? Can you even take care of yourself? The room fell silent. No one realized who they had just insulted until the president's secretary personally called the center director's desk. Who was this woman? And what made an entire nation bow their heads in gratitude?